20 after 7, after 3 years at the helm of power utility Eskom, Andre De Ruyter has finally thrown in the towel. The move comes as South Africa battles crippling power cuts that have only really worsened since that crisis began, nearly 15 years ago. De Ruyter has been under pressure to fix our electricity woes, and as I said earlier, he's the 11th CEO in the last 13 years. We're joined now by two experts who know all about this. Ted Blom, who is joining us, as well as Professor Mark Swilling, who is also a commissioner of the National Planning Commission and a co-direct at the Center for Sustainability Transitions at Stellenbosch University, and a number of other titles. Ted, let me start with you. One of the obvious questions to now ask is, when De Ruyter took the job, is it your sense that he perhaps may not have known what he was getting himself into in terms of all of the elements he would have to deal with?
Good morning. Yes, I think with hindsight, it's clear that he underestimated what the requirements were. But, he came in through the political back door. I know some of the other candidates that were interested in the job and who had thorough engineering background and experience, as well as utility experience. And they were overlooked in expense for Mr. De Ruyter. So, and if he was anything of the man he made out to be as a turnaround specialist, he would have done his own work. In fact, Mr. Godin said that out of all the applications, De Ruyter actually submitted a video highlighting what he planned to do within what time period. So the fact that he actually missed the ball and he got his brain hijacked after a month or two, because he initially started off making the right noises, and then shortly after that he abandoned the refurbishment of the old power stations. He spent 80 billion rand, 82 billion rand to be precise, on prepaying a debt which could have been used on that refurbishment exercise. It shows to me that he clearly was way out of his depth.
So good riddance as far as you're concerned, Ted?
Well, I think it's worse than that. I think it's 3 wasted years, because we're now further back. Eskom's setback is further back than what it was when he started the job.
All right, Professor Mark Swilling, Ted Blom, shooting straight from the hip. Do you agree with that assessment?
I completely disagree. I do agree that he underestimated the challenge. 9 months after taking up his appointment, he came to the realization that the machines were in much worse condition than what he had assumed, and that unless new generation capacity could be brought onto the grid within 2 years, there would be permanent load shedding by 2024. And so he rationally looked through what were the options and came to the conclusion that renewables plus backup gas and battery was really the only solution, because that can be built on time within 2 years, are affordable, and you could raise the finance for them, unlike the other technology. So that was the strategy. Unfortunately, Eskom doesn't control the procurement of renewables. That was the responsibility of the Minister for Mineral Resources and Energy. So I completely disagree with Ted's assessment. I think the strategy that evolved makes a lot of sense, still makes a lot of sense, but probably won't be reproduced by the new CEO, which will deepen our energy crisis.
Well, that same Energy Minister, Gwede Mantashe, played a clip just a moment or so ago where he practically accused Andre De Ruyter's leadership at Eskom of treason, quite frankly. That kind of breakdown in trust with government, when in fact there was no defense from the president, no defense from the Public Enterprises Minister, was probably the last straw, Prof. Swilling.
Yeah, I think that is true, but I think, more significantly, the board did not counteract that accusation, and that really tells you a lot, because any board should be there to defend their CEO if that CEO is being accused of leading a treasonable act. So I think that is also a matter of concern. But it's definitely the last straw that broke the camel's back.
Ted Blom, your criticism notwithstanding, we've heard allegations of sabotage, resistance from workers, practically mutiny, if you think about it. And of course, the murky politics, opposition from unions. I played a clip earlier of the Gauteng Premier, for example, saying we will march on the utility and bring the numbers, the likes of which had never been seen before. I mean, how many people could have withstood all of that?
No, I mean, from the get-go, he was a round peg in a square hole. But let's just talk about Mr. Professor Swilling's allegations. The fact of the matter is Eskom has installed capacity of 49 gigawatts. They only need, on a good day, between 27 and 29 gigawatts. The cheapest and fastest available capacity is the stuff that you've already got on your fleet. And really, to come with other technologies when 85% of your generation capacity comes from coal, to now change ship midstream and want to go into a new, unproven energy mode with energy availability on a good day of below 20% versus a notional capacity availability of over 70% is just completely preposterous. If you wanted to go renewables, you should have done it in Eskom 2 or 3, not within the organization whose whole culture for 100 years was geared on engineering excellence of coal-based power stations.
What about what about the aging fleet and the power stations that have consistently been breaking down, and of course the move really around the world away from fossil fuels to renewables? Isn't that a factor to consider, Ted Blom?
Well, and also that move has changed in the last 2 months from Germany and Europe back to coal. The German coal fleet, by the way, is on average older than the Eskom coal fleet. And I can take you to power stations that are over 100 years old, being properly maintained and running in perfect nick. In fact, if you've flown on 747 Boeing in the last 10 or 15 years, that aircraft would have been more than 30 to 40 years old. But because it was properly maintained, is as safe or even better than a new aircraft. So the whole story about depleted fleet, it's only depleted because it hasn't been properly maintained. And part and parcel of the maintenance problem is part of the Eskom leadership, where they deliberately cut the maintenance budget by over 75% and or delayed the budget deployment. So no, I don't buy the story that you need to, yes, eventually you can graduate and once the technology is proven, but to change something with a reliability factor of 70% plus, or something with a reliability factor of below 20%, you need to have rocks in your head.
Professor Mark Swilling, was this all an own goal, as you've just heard Ted suggest?
No, I mean, Ted Blom's arguments are full of contradictions. I mean, the notion that Europe or Germany is going back to coal is just not true. It means he hasn't read the Easter package, which has redoubled Germany's commitments to renewables. This is a temporary shift to respond to a war situation. I mean, you can't expect people to ignore war. So on the question of the state of the fleet, he contradicts his own argument. He says there's 49 gigawatts of installed capacity, but then he also says there's been a cut in the maintenance budget by Eskom CEOs, which is not applicable to De Ruyter. It's applicable to the CEOs that came before De Ruyter, and that resulted in the running down of the power stations. And as he correctly says, if you run down the power stations, then they don't last very long. And that is exactly the problem. So you can't say 49 gigawatts, therefore we have capacity. You yes have to say 49 gigawatts of capacity, yes, on condition they are properly maintained. But as he says, they weren't properly maintained. And therefore we have a crisis. And to restore them means taking them offline, overhauling them fundamentally, which takes months, not days or weeks. But that can't happen until there's new generation capacity on the grid. So it's obvious his arguments are fundamentally contradictory.
So what do we do now? I mean, just because of time, Ted, we're going to have to move on from that point. But what do we do now? Can we afford another beginner who has to be brought up to speed? And also in the context of not only De Ruyter leaving, his COO is also exiting. We've seen other senior leaders, the head of generation, for example, and so on, resign. It couldn't have come at a worst possible moment. Ted, I'll let you go first.
Okay, so just on the professor, just to correct him, there's a big difference between what Germany is doing now and stated commitments for the future. So I'd reject his notion. Secondly, I mean, the definitive work of what is required at Eskom was done by CRO advisors in 2019. I participated in that exercise. So yes, you need to get somebody who's got the experience, who's got the qualifications, they can hit the ground running, and they can make a massive difference in the load shedding within a period of under 6 months. And yes, it's going to take time. I estimated if you're going to do it in a timely fashion and not in a war room fashion, it will take between 5 years and a couple of R100 billion to fix up. So the fact of the matter is, if you look at Eskom statistics, it's not as the professor says that it's been neglected by successive CEOs. I'm talking about the current CEO. That's what we're talking about.
Mark Swilling, I'll let you have the last word on this. Can we find somebody to hit the ground running, given that it's not just De Ruyter who has left?
The problem is that the conversation has been completely misconstrued as if it is the individual that matters. What we're dealing with is a systemic crisis. And what you need for a systemic crisis is an effective team. And so you need somebody who is going to be able to build an effective team, not just within Eskom, but within the state as a whole, that is going to get behind a vision and a strategy that is technically rational, financially viable, and is supported by business and civil society. That's the challenge. And anybody coming in should have a manifesto that is signed off by the stakeholders before they accept the job. Otherwise, they're going to be in exactly the same position as De Ruyter, i.e. the fall guy.
Appreciate both of you coming onto the show, your time, giving us your time this morning. That's, of course, energy expert Ted Blom and Professor Mark Swilling.
Current events, developing stories,
tough questions.
Your voice making a difference.
This is Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa.